I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the land that we are gathered on across Australia, and to pay my respects to my elders, both past and present, and to give recognition to the next generation of emerging leaders, and to honour those that have gone before us, who have led the struggles of our people for our fight for justice, recognition, and seeking a treaty. The lands that I'm on is the lands of the Jagera and Turrbal people. And it's a pleasure to be with you all here tonight, because one of the things that I hold dear to my heart is the opportunity to embrace our interfaith, because, you know, I think that the Creator has spoken into all of our lives and our cultures in different ways, and has given us and revealed to us truth that we hold dear and that we treasure. The sad reality is that we don't get the opportunity to share this more openly in a broader focus, where we can celebrate our different expressions, but also the uniqueness of our faith that each and every one of us hold. For me, I'm going to reflect a little bit personally of a journey that I have had as well, like Pat, and also to look at a broader picture of what multicultural Australia is or should be within our present day. But, you know, over the past 233 years, Australia has become a multicultural society with many different faiths, religious institutions. Yet, despite this fact, Australia still struggles to embrace and incorporate these religious faiths into a cultural identity. Sadly, the ugly face of racism saturates the moral and social fabric of Australia's consciousness, where we non-Western people are forced to continue to confront and combat systematic racism at every turn. Anglo-Australians still hold to the idea that they are superior in almost, although most of them may no longer be practicing Christians. They still lack full comprehension of our religious beliefs. They nevertheless still hold a negative views about our faith's inferiority and deem to term our faith as barbarian, evil, or demonic. This attitude isn't new to us, Australia First Nations peoples, as this is what we have combated over the past 2 centuries, this notion of Western superiority. Because of this racist views, they never understood the significance of our worldview, spirituality, and faith. So let me begin by giving you a little insight into Australia First Nations spiritual beliefs and how this has enabled us to survive. Australia First Nations are profoundly religious in their character. The formalities of our life, the mode of our life and thought, and our every act has spiritual significance. Our most deliberate words and deeds revolve around religious considerations. We have a highly developed sense of the sacred, and our views of ourselves and of our world are preeminently religious. We have always centered our lives in the spiritual natural world. We are deeply committed to the Creator and our ancestors, to the creation and consciousness and an instinct. Only through our spiritual connection to the creation can we continue in our own identity. Therefore, we conceive of ourselves in the terms of the land. In our view, the earth is sacred. It is a living entity in which other living entities have origin and destiny. It is where our identity comes from, where our spirituality begins. It is the dreaming. It is where stewardship begins, and it is where life source is sustained. We are bound to the earth in our spirit. By means of our involvement in the natural world, we can ensure our own well-being. One of the greatest strengths lays in our ability to communicate with the spiritual world around us. This is manifested in our extensive use of symbolism, in our visionary experiences, in our dreaming, in the use of our language. These forms of communication and these symbols have clear expression in our ancestral narratives. The initiation ceremonies, the sacred sites, the healing rituals, and the ceremonies. They are evident in our oral traditions. To understand Australia First Nations worldview, non-Indigenous people need to immerse themselves into our metaphysical world. This is not an easy task to do because our perception of ourselves and our world, whether it is physical, emotional, or spiritual, is not fragmented. Rather, these elements all coexist together. The importance of this connection between ourselves and other living forms of creation is expressed through totemism. The ritual performance associated with this influence and ensures the reproduction of both the natural and the human continuation and the natural cycle of seasons. Through many thousands of years, we Australia First Nations have developed an intimate relationship between ourselves and our environment. Through our spiritual interconnections with the natural world, we do not see ourselves as separate from it, but as inextricably bound to it. Our place and survival in this world comes as a direct result of this close relationship with our natural environment. Our relationship with our environment is not one of domination or manipulation. We do not erect huge religious cathedrals, churches, or synagogues to highlight the significance of a sacred area. Instead, our sacred sites are natural land formations where our ancestral spirits interacted with creation and therefore based Aboriginal ownership on our spiritual identification and association with our land, water, and sea. Through the bestowal of land by the Creator to our ancestors, we, Australia First Nations, share in maintaining our interconnections through shared responsibilities and obligations through our totemic relationships or as custodians of certain sacred sites. This is done through rituals and ceremonies continually performed at exact times of each year. These cannot be done by just anyone, as they can only be done by those responsible as custodians of that particular site. These may be done, however, by more than one language group. Those who share in these obligations may be custodians of a specific section of the ritual relating to the site through their totemic association and through shared ownership of the sacred knowledge and so on. Cooperation or sharing is an important factor in Australia First Nations society, not only between genders, but also between clan and tribal language groups. Division of labour is shared amongst the community, as well as the responsibility and obligations of sacred rituals and ceremonies shared between clans, tribes, as each may have ownership of certain sections. For us in Australia First Nations, when I look at our relationship to country, to land, to who we are, what people don't tend to understand is that my identity is formed out of the land I am connected to. So I am spiritually and emotionally and physically connected. And it is through that identity do I have a sense of responsibility and obligation, which the Creator has given me. So as I've journeyed on, some of the things that I've experienced throughout life, and these are the context or the foundational learnings I learned from my mother and from my elders, that, you know, as we were touched by Christianity and grew up in a Christian environment and in a church, a lot of what I knew to be me was labeled as demonic and quite often aggressively attacked within these Christian forums, and particularly from the pulpit by the ministers. And of course, I struggled with that. I had to struggle with, you know, why would the Creator create me as an Aboriginal person to have this spiritual significance and attachment to land and to ancestors, only to have a Christian faith tell me that that's demonic. And that was a real struggle I have struggled, well, most of our people have struggled with, because the paradox between that is we all believe in the Creator, and that Creator has created us in the image and in the image of the Creator, and through that has given us law, has given us ceremonies, has given us rituals, has given us our life, and define for us our relationships and how we must interact with one another. And to have that aggressively attacked throughout my life has been a struggle that I've had to maintain, because I, in one breath, love my culture and embrace it fully, but in the second breath, I also embrace Christianity. And quite often, sometimes, the way it is presented through an Anglo perception doesn't sit well with my Aboriginality. And therefore, I've had to do a lot of theological studies to be able to validate for myself what Christ would say into my life and my culture. And of course, in doing that, I have found my wholeness, my fullness of who I am, both Aboriginal as well as Christian. And I've been able to marry those two things together, as Miriam Rose Ungamara has done as well, and find voice and expression in that life. One of the things that I find really sad in Australia is that our inability to see value in each other's faith, to be able to identify those riches that have given to us through our Creator, those values that we could share with one another, that could absolutely make Australian society blossom in a way that is so unique just to us. We are the most multicultural society in the world, and yet we don't embrace what has come to us as a way of a gift. We don't cherish what the Creator has created around the globe. I just marvel sometimes when I get an opportunity to sit down with another faith and to learn about their faith, their understanding of you know, how the Creator has spoken into their lives and given them value and given them truth, and to learn from them and to find some comparisons in those conversations of understanding of how we are to live together and how we are to respect creation, each other, and to value humanity. And I just wonder if there is ever an opportunity where we can find a greater expression of this in a more holistic way, in the sense of, you know, having a celebration of faith. You imagine this, if you guys ever hosted a national celebration of faith, that all peoples could come together, share culture, food, faith, teachings, songs, dancing, ceremony. What an incredible experience that would be for Australia and for all of our children to experience, to have everyone come together and say, this is Australia, this is who we are. We're not this colonial context of, you know, coming in, conquering. We are now a country full of so many different languages, so many different cultures. And I just wonder what that would look like. I conjure up all these different images of how beautiful it would be. What an incredible social fabric that would be for us to experience. I've done small events in Sydney where we've brought different faiths together and cultures, and we've tried to find ways to build community in the sense of respecting and learning from one another. But I think it's something we need to do at a larger scale, I think, because as Australia becomes, Anglo-Australia becomes more secular, I think at some point we're also losing the sense of our own spiritual belief and worth as a country. And, I'm the first one to say, I think when you lose that belief in some supreme being or spiritual connection to creation, you lose a little bit of yourself somewhere along the way. And, one of the things that I capture is, Pat Dodson spoke about was to offer some understanding of the deeply spiritual nature of Aboriginal people through an explanation of the dreaming. An understanding of the concept of the dreaming is essential to any understanding of Australia First Nations worldview. The English word dreaming can be misleading because the concept which it translates are extremely complex and largely are related to the English meaning of the word. These concepts often are alternatively described as the law. They are a coherent and all-encapsulating body of truth which govern the whole of life. The dreaming, or the law, includes the past and ongoing activities of creative and life-giving forces, which always retains a sense of immanence and transcendence of the actual potential. Western understanding of time is beautifully confounded by these concepts. So, when we begin to look at Aboriginal faith and religion or spirituality, however you want to determine, there is such a depth in our souls of who we are, an ancient people who, Australia can proudly say it has the oldest living culture in the world here at its back door, yet it doesn't cherish it, it doesn't value it, it doesn't want to protect it, it doesn't even want to embrace it. And that I am at a loss. I can't understand why a country would not want to value and cherish the oldest living culture in the world, but also to learn from it. Imagine the knowledge and wisdom that is possessed by our people that could be shared with current governments and scientists around how to live with creation, how to honour, how to maybe address the current environmental crises that we confront, and how to, repair our lands and our environment and restore it back to its wonder and beauty once again. I just wonder, when we consider and we look at currently the situation of First Nations peoples in this country, when we talk about the statement from the heart, that in itself, where we had elders reaching out to Australia in such reverence and kindness and grace, extending a hand to you, a cry for recognition, a cry for help, a cry for justice. I just don't know how many times my people need to be reaching out and asking, can you hear us? Can anybody hear us? Can you see our suffering? Can you see our pain? How do we link hands in addressing this continuing injustice that is being perpetuated upon Australia First Nation, when we all know deep in our heart that it should end, that we should do justice, that we must give recognition and we must address the history in the past. When we look at the Indigenous voice to Parliament, where Aboriginal people all over the country are not wanting to be silenced anymore or unheard, we want a voice in Parliament, whatever form that may take, because we're tired of being told what we need rather than Parliament listening to what we need for our children and our future. We know what our people need and we know what we need to do in order to survive, but nobody listens. We have now in Victoria and Northern Territory the treaty commissions conversations that have been happening, also in Queensland. And we have the establishment of the truth commissions in Northern Territory and also in Victoria. I take my hat off and I'm absolutely moved that government has had the courage to move to this stage where we can begin to talk about our history without offence, without propagation, without blame, but say this is what we've inherited. We've inherited this history, and it's now up to us to make that correct, to write that history, to do justice, and to forge for us a future that we can go forward on. And this can only happen when we begin to acknowledge that the heart of this country is the heart of Aboriginal people. That, you know, our country will grow in prosperity and also in its maturity when it can begin to recognise that in order for it to, how would you say, heal, it must address the past. Sadly, I always say my restitution or my salvation is tied to your salvation, Australia, because until you can recognise that we need to address our history, we need to set the record straight, we need to do justice, I don't have a future and neither do my children. And that's the sad reality in this country. I'd love for my children to have a future and to be able to embrace all humanity that has come here and to be able to define for us a national image that values us, that embraces us, but also recognises us as the First Nations of this country. So in building unity and peace in this country, as a multicultural society, how do we build an Australia that embraces our religious differences and values us and sees the strength in which Aboriginal spirituality, values and beliefs are to be interwoven into any fabric of this society that we need to have in order to build a future? We will no longer be invisible as we've been treated. We won't be silent anymore, and we won't be shunned anymore. We're getting more verbal, we're getting more bold, but we're getting more articulate too, and far better educated to be able to lead some of these campaigns and these discussions. I firmly believe we have so much to offer Australia, our multicultural world, as we have such spiritual depth, faith, values that we live our lives by, which dictates all aspects of our lives. There is so much we can learn from each other if only we have the chance. I believe this can be done by building greater opportunities to share and create our faiths together, celebrate our faiths together, where we can learn from each other and share in each other's cultures form significant relationships that enable us to gain a deeper knowledge and understanding of each other to build unity and peace. Let us go out and host a national multi-faith celebration. Perhaps that could be done every 2 years or even every third year, where we can find a safe place to celebrate our uniqueness, our faith, and express it in a way that can be truly Australian, because we are no longer predominantly a Christian society. We are an interfaith society, and it's time, I think, we nurtured that, celebrated it, and gave words to it in a way that makes us a wonderful nation that other nations can look towards and say, you know, what leadership we show, what interfaith we can show, but most of all, what an incredible society we can build together by learning from each other.